Baltic Sea Adventure. Previously on Baltic Sea Adventure, Kimmo, Tanya and Jari see the winter sights of Tallinn, Estonia, and look for the Estonian submarine Lembit. We hear the story of sunken Russian monitor-type warship Rosalka that was only recently found by Estonian and Finnish divers and stands upright at the bottom of the Baltic Sea.
Standing upright. And you make this right decision.
Swedish technical diving team Tor, Par and Charlotta tell us about technical diving.
It's a perfect fit.
They dive wrecks U-boat U-711, Blackwatch and Landego. We visit the Finnish Maritime Museum in Helsinki, and a maritime archeologist tells us about the Finnish waters.
We actually have a lot of known wrecks in Finnish water.
Our rental boat is still under renovation, but the owners assure us it will be ready for the diving trips this summer. Tanya and Kimmo start their journey from England around the Baltic Sea, and the search for the lost U-boat U-479 continues. We have arrived in Germany. Cuxhaven is a pretty town and a popular German holiday destination, situated on the shore of the North Sea and at the mouth of the Elbe River. Kimmo and Tanya have picked up their friend Jari from the Bremen airport. The first stop, U-boat archive near Cuxhaven. At the door, Kimmo and Jari are greeted by English-German author and maritime historian Jack P. Malman-Schowel. He has written over 40 books about German U-boats and will be able to help us.
Because when you go in, there is a shelf.
This vast archive is a result of lifelong work by Horst Bredow. As a young man, Mr. Bredow served on the German U-boat, and since then he has been collecting any information he can get about the history of U-boats and submarines.
Like a fish.
That's true.
He's well over 80 years old. His fluent English comes from the time he spent at the American prison camp after the Second World War. Jari and Mr. Bredow talk about the possible collision between Russian submarine Lembit and the German U-boat U-479.
Lost.
It's funny, when I started there was almost nothing. You must tell me when I should start.
You can start now.
Yeah.
You are ready? Yes.
So, my name is Horst Bredow. I'm a former watch officer of a German U-boat in the Second World War. And when I came back from prisonership, I started to bring together the history of my boat, and so started this work in this archive. I never knew, and I never thought that it will become such a large size, but now it's done, and I'm an old man, and I'm working the whole day, or 8 to 10 hours a day, and I'm happy to do that. In a year we have more than 4,000 special visitors, historians, authors.
So, this is a workroom. It's my bureau in the afternoon.
Yes.
This is Grand Admiral Dönitz. Here, this is von Friedeburg, Admiral von Friedeburg. This is my commander, and that was me. This little lieutenant over there.
I was first on U-11, and then I became watch officer on the Type 7 boat, and I was in the northern area, in the ice mirror, in the ice sea, and during that time I was wounded and I was in the hospital. My boat didn't come back. I was on prisoner ship until 1947, more than 2 years. And when I came back from prisoner ship, I started to do this work. When the war was finished, I was 22 years. Now I'm 82.
Mr. Bredder also served in Narvik, Norway. It was a busy port during the Second World War. Norway was occupied by Nazi Germany and heavily bombed by the Allied forces. Narvik is full of wrecks from that period.
Then we have a Titanic.
The Swedish diving team dive Erik Giese, a well-preserved wreck of a German destroyer.
This is one of few, maybe the only actually totally intact German destroyer in the world. So it's a really exciting dive to do. And you can see already in the first shots that the visibility is really good. And if you compare it to other scenes from the Baltic, you can actually see that the water is a bit bluer. It was sunk during full battle, and all of the ammunition and stuff was still on the boat, and it was so deep so they couldn't salvage stuff at that time, at that depth. And it's still leaking oil actually, so that's one of the reasons it's still prohibited to dive there. But we got permission to dive and to document it. And the things you see on the wreck, you can, of course, you probably recognize the cannons. The destroyers, they were equipped with 4 cannons, I guess.
And also you can see along the railing the depth chargers. They look like small barrels. Quite many of them down there. As well as a box, a mystery box. We don't know what it contains, but you can see one of the divers shining his light on it. We didn't open it, we thought it could be ammunition.
You can see the big propellers in the...
You can see also the angle of the propeller blades. It's a very high-speed ship.
So it's a really impressive boat and a really impressive dive to do. But as you see, it's a more or less totally intact wreck.
We're getting to the torpedo tube.
Yeah, the torpedoes were shot from the torpedo tubes by compressed air, just over the railing of the boat, and then when landing in the water, it propelled itself with a propeller.
The bridge, it got a few direct hits. I can't remember how many, but that's the only part of the ship that's really damaged. The wind was pretty strong, and we also had a current because to deal with the tide. The biggest problem was that we didn't have enough line to tie the boat in, so we were at a very steep angle.
Right.
The pressure on the line was big, and I could see the line vibrating.
You can see the strain on the line. It was like vibrating really hard.
Yeah.
So at least Lotta realized the second before it broke that this is going to break.
Yeah. So I just gave a sign for shooting
the buoy that is attached to a line, so we can do the ascent on the new line, the new up line to the buoy. And the buoy makes us visible to the boat, so they can like drive around and protect us from the big dangerous boats.
Yeah. So it
It
worked fine.
went fine, but it was a couple scary minutes before, like.
We are looking for any information about the lost U-boat U-479 that sank in the Finnish waters at the Baltic Sea at the end of the Second World War. The archive has all the logbooks of all the U-boats.
You see, each day the U-boat command lists where every U-boat was. So you can, with this, reconstruct the history of any U-boat which was lost.
Yes.
But what is also interesting is with some boats the pages are missing. And Admiralty had taken out those significant pages.
Where something happened.
Where something had obviously happened that Admiralty didn't want us to know about. Because these were captured by the British and Americans after the war. Why? Obviously something there.
Yeah, there's a mystery there. And probably a sunken ship as well.
The U-479 logbook. That if we can see it as a microfilm, that would be very interesting to see how that ends.
Author Jack P. Malman-Schowel lives in England, but he spends a lot of time in Germany doing research for his books. After a quick search, we find traces of the lost U-boat and even a photo of it.
Oh, there is one. Yeah, it's in the back. Yeah, it says in Helsinki, 1944.
It was sunk on the 12th of the 12th, 1944, near near Turku, by the Soviet U-boat Lambit.
There you go.
Axel Niestle, who was the expert in what happened to U-boats, doesn't name the Lambit. In the absence of a Russian attack to account for its sinking, there is presently no known explanation for its loss.
So that also sort of goes well with the story, doesn't it?
That goes well with it. Now, we don't know at all what happened to U-479. It just vanished.
We've tried to find a way to give only to give out the facts.
Yes.
If any diver should find the wreck of this boat, U-479, he shouldn't go into the boat because it is a war grave.
But how can they identify the boat without going in it?
Not possible.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. What happened to the U-479? Yeah, I can't answer it because
Well, you have answered it. You've said that we don't know.
we don't know. That's right.
That's good enough for us.
Okay.
If it's still there.
It's so small.
If not...
We soon find out that Jack knows lots of good stories. And that is an actual U-boat periscope.
Sunk as a result of just sticking up the periscope and somebody saw it. But for attacking, you only had to see the surface.
And there is no way that you could see that. It's a needle in a haystack.
People did. You know, people stuck it up for 10 seconds and it was spotted.
Really?
Because I thought that was the scale model.
Jack helps us to plan our trip along the northern German coastline. There are a few relevant sites for us to have a look at by the Baltic Sea.
I mean, I could possibly on a Tuesday go with you.
Then we could do the bunkers, we could do the U-boat, and we could do the Enigma.
Is it alright if we show up tomorrow anyway at what time?
10? Jack happens to have some extra time on his hands, and he joins us for a day trip to Bremerhaven. On the way to Bremerhaven, we stop at the Aeronautical Museum. Jari likes this stuff and has a good look around. There's a good display of naval mines here. Jack explains the workings of a floating contact mine.
Can you see that cable connects to this? It unwinds the cable as this floats. So when that weight, can you see that sort of short piece of string? When that weight touches the bottom, that stops unwinding.
Yes.
So that will not float on the surface. It will float however deep you'd set it below that surface, depending how long this string is. Gaps. So there were a lot of these in the Bay of Finland in 1944.
Jack phoned the museum curator beforehand to ask if we could see their collection of Enigma machines. Every German plane, boat and U-boat would have had one, including the missing U-boat U-479.
The word Enigma is now used to describe German coding machines. So Enigma means unbreakable puzzle, and it very much looks as if the Germans were convinced that the code couldn't be broken. But of course, Bletchley Park did break it, Britain's best kept secret. And the people who did crack it, they must have been amazing people with amazing minds. This is the early Enigma version. You can tell that it was the early version because it's got 3 wheels here. When the U-boat command thought that Britain might be reading the U-boat code, they introduced another wheel. And this one, as you can see, has got 4 wheels in it. Now the wheels are quite simple. There are 26 contacts on one side, and if you turn it over, they are wired to 26 contacts on the other side. The wiring in each wheel is different. And you can change these letters to go into any one of those contacts. So you've got 26 times 26 contacts, haven't you? Although the machine had 3 wheels in it at any one time, there was a choice of about 7, and they could be put in any order. So if you now work this out, you have quite a vast combinations of electrical circuits. Now how it worked was in fact relatively simple, is that you pressed one of these keys. If you pressed, for example, D, any letter would light up except letter D. And when you pressed it a second time, any letter would light up except letter D, and except the letter which lit up the last time. You could actually change the circuit from here to here before it goes to the wheels. And I always keep forgetting the number, so I wrote it down. As you can see, it is 205 followed by 12 digits. That means you could decode every book on earth with this machine, and you would never repeat the code setting. This is where you require a very special brain, because the Enigma machine had an Achilles heel. It had one error. And the error was you would never decode a letter as itself. Therefore, you were 100% certain that whatever letter was in the message, it was one letter of the alphabet, but not the one that was on the piece of paper. And from that, a mathematician worked out that you could mathematically crack the code. And the way they did it was to make somebody send a message where they knew the meaning of the message. At a place in England called Bletchley Park, they built the first electronic computer. This was long before the Americans had a computer, and that was used to crack German signals, including messages coming in and out of Hitler's headquarters. And not only were these messages cracked, but they could crack them quicker than the Germans could decode with a coding machine. So the British very often had the news before the Germans got it.
How the British cracked the code and how this information was kept a secret from the Germans is a small miracle. The fact that the British could read the Enigma codes was a paramount for the Western Allies' victory in the Second World War. They could follow the German communications and decode the messages, sometimes quicker than the Germans. Meanwhile, Tor, Per and Lotta do one more dive in Narvik. This time, a mystery wreck. Identifying wrecks can be difficult, and the thick blanket of marine life makes it even more so.
As we said, there are many really good wrecks in Narvik Harbour, really good dives.
Well, shallow wrecks you can easily do an hour.
Yeah, and they're really popular among not only Swedish divers, but of course Norwegians too. And
actually, English divers travels. They usually list this English dive boat laying in the harbour in Narvik during all the summers.
Yeah.
It's like one of the best places to dive for sports divers.
If you don't want to go to the Red Sea, and this is the best Nordic alternative, it is like the Norwegian Red Sea.
Like Per and Lotta told us, you don't have to travel south to find beautiful corals. Bremerhaven is the busy port of Bremen, which is situated further inland. There is a German maritime museum here, and they have a good collection of museum ships. This is Soitadieren. The name means sweet girl in Old German. She's a windjammer, a sailing ship with an iron or steel hull, and these were widely used as cargo ships all over the world. The invention of steam engines killed the use of these beauties. We had a drink on board.
Another rocket after the B-2. It produced several additional rockets. If you look at some ancient Chinese skips, you find references to these. They tried the rocket out and made it into it.
That's a bizarre story.
It is a very bizarre story, but it would be worth one day following it.
The museum collection also has a Type 21 U-boat, U-2540. This huge boat was built just before the end of the Second World War, and therefore never took part in the warfare.
So there was a lot of submarine down there.
It was intentionally sunk at the end of the war, so this boat is also a kind of wreck of the Baltic Sea.
This is the officers' mess.
We get a tour from our U-boat expert, Jack.
There's the capacity, can you see? Yes. This is what was so special about this boat. And on the bottom circle it's full of batteries. And that made it very luxurious, very wide for submarines.
Yep.
The hydroplane, the depth controls over there.
After more than 10 years on the bottom of the Baltic Sea, this boat was raised, overhauled, and commissioned as a research vessel in the German Navy, and served as such till the 1980s.
If you turn round and look at the two diesel engines,
it was renamed after Wilhelm Bauer, the designer of the first German U-boat. It is the only floating example of a Type 21 U-boat. When taking Yadi back to the airport, we stopped to have a look at a massive U-boat bunker, Valentin, near Bremen. They were like wartime garages for U-boats, with wet and dry docking. and strong enough to take on serious bombing by the Allied forces. This building is still in use as a storage by the German army. They do tours here, but we didn't have time. We had a plane to catch. Jari will fly back to Finland. On the way to the airport, we reflect on what we'd learned at the U-boat archive. The future of the archives is currently uncertain. Horst Bredow is not a young man anymore. One interested party for keeping up the archives and collections is the town of Cuxhaven, and there are plans for opening a museum for this purpose. The Second World War era German history is still controversial, but the archives is definitely a valuable asset to writers, students and historians. The biggest maritime disaster in the world happened in the Baltic Sea. At the end of the Second World War, German ocean liners Gustloff, Steuben and Goya were overspilling with Germans fleeing the Russian occupation. A Russian submarine torpedoed and sunk them. It's such a massive and neglected tragedy that we listened to several stories. Legendary British diver Lee Bishop has dived and photographed Wilhelm Gustloff.
Yeah, it's kind of a wreck that is got serious political history. You know, huge amount of people died on that wreck, you know, massive loss of life, and it's a story that you just don't hear about, you know. I mean, she's like 25,000 ton liner built in the 1930s, built for the strength through joy period. It was like a period of time when Hitler was reigning. There was no first, second and third class passengers. It was all a classless society. You know, you've got to remember, a lot of people didn't buy into the Nazi party, you know. So, yeah, and as the Russian Red Army was advancing back in to that part of the world, this was like, you know, 1945, beginning of 1945, end of 1944, and basically they were evacuating on anything that was available. Of course, the Gustloff had been, you know, this huge, wonderful ocean liner, had been moored up in that bay for 3 or 4 years and hadn't moved at all. So what they did is they fired it up, and there were said to be 7,700 people left on that ship. That was a ship made for 1,500, 2,000 people at the most. Yeah. You know, so heavily overloaded. So what they did is they, you're bearing in mind this is January 1945. It's freezing cold. Parts of the Baltic are frozen, and it's minus 23 degrees. The Gustloff had left the harbour then. It was on its way out. And on its way out, there was a lot more ships actually pulled up alongside, and a lot of nets came down the side, and hundreds and thousands of more people climbed up the side. And some historians say there was a possibility there's 10,000 people who were on that wreck, on that ship when it sailed. Yeah. Now 2.5 hours out of the bay there, and she took a torpedo from Russian submarine S-13 Marinishkov. But he torpedoed that and the Goya as well, and at the same time the General Steuben was another ship that was carrying a lot of people that had gone down, and so we're looking at something like 10,000 people on board that ship. Yeah. So what was the loss of life on that day?
10,000
people,
400 something people survived.
Massive loss of life.
Massive loss. That's maritime's worst ever disaster, Roy. You know? Yeah, but you've never heard of it, have you? No, so many people have not heard this story. I was taking these beautiful wide-angle black and white shots of this wonderfully preserved poop deck with all the stern railing around it, yeah? And we swam round the stern, and you could see the letters Wilhelm Gustloff in Nazi
still
Gothic lettering. It was unbelievable, you know, you really felt a sense of history down there. And another thing, Roy, we thought we were going to see, you know, lots of human remains, but that actually wasn't the case.
But we never really see human remains on many wrecks, though, even though
well,
there's been loss of life.
But you know, with 10,000 people, you would have thought you'd seen some. After the dive, I've come up, and I'm just sitting on the surface, and there's only one other place I felt a presence, and that was on the Titanic, when we was out on Titanic.
Yeah.
You know, you knew something bad had happened there.
In Dover, Jak tells his side of the story.
Passenger ships of World War II in Germany were built for economy, not speed. And when the Gustloff sailed, it was decided that being a passenger ship, it should go on its own. Now this was fine, except that it just didn't have the speed to outrun a submarine. The Gustloff then was attacked by a Soviet U-boat and it sank, but the losses were about 4 times that of the Titanic. I suppose one of the people who helped me to become a writer, and a photographer for that matter, is a chap called Captain Otto Köhler, who was sailing immediately behind the Gustloff in a minesweeper. He had loaded it up with as many people as the boat could carry and was making for Kiel, having left obviously East Prussia, Gultenhafen. Now when the Gustloff went up in front of him, he couldn't stop, which was for him a most tragic experience, and I think it's a sort of ghost that lived with him all his life. But he had to sail around these screaming people in the water. It was also, I believe, January or February, so it was winter, it was cold. And the reason he couldn't stop was because, of course, he had too many people on board for safety already, and he just couldn't carry any more. But the sort of ironic twist in this story is that had the Gustloff not been there, of course, my friend Otto Köhler would have died because he would have been the target that submarine would have shot at. I mean, the Russian submarines were out to sink ships. I don't think at that stage of the war they could really care less what or who was on them. Everybody was attacking each other's ships on sight.
You know, heard about a Titanic story. 1,500 people died. What's the second most famous shipwreck in the world? Probably the Lusitania?
Probably the Lusitania.
Yeah. 1,200 people died. You bring a modern day disaster into the equation, say something like the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not until you add all those 3 together that you start getting an idea of this disaster, the scale of this disaster we're talking about here, you know? So then it's not until you double that figure that you get somewhere near the amount of people that died on the Wilhelm Gustloff. Yet you never hear the story. Why is that? But it's like, you know, you could bring in the politics of because they were German, it didn't matter. Well, that wasn't the case, because many of those people that were probably on that wreck, you know, as I said, didn't buy into the Nazi party.
And
you know, they didn't want the war or anything.
So
they were victims of war. Teresa's Polish. She comes from Poland, didn't you?
Yeah, my parents are from Poland. I think what after the war, lots of things that the people tried to do was really forget what happened. You know, my parents, when my mother was 9, she was put on a train by her mum, and she never saw her parents again. And people forget some of the atrocities of war and what happened to so many people. In the same case, my dad was 14 and he was taken by the Germans for a German work camp and never saw his family again. When they repatriated, they came to this country. And I think people just generally forget what happened during the war, possibly because at the time they wanted to forget because it was all so terrible. And diving something like the William Gustloff reminds people about what happened and the atrocities that happened at the time.
Survivors, you know, sons and daughters have actually got in contact with me through the photography that I've done on the Wilhelm Gustloff, and you know, they've wanted to know more. What's the wreck like? You know, and in respect to that as well, I've able to ask them questions and get photographs and stories of what was going on. So this is the camera that I used in the Baltic Sea to shoot pictures of the Wilhelm Gustloff. Okay, this is traditionally a land camera inside a waterproof housing. There you have the land camera in there. It's a 16mm wide-angle lens. The reason it's a wide-angle lens is so I can reduce the column of water between myself and the subject matter, and in doing so I can take away a lot of interference in between the actual picture that I'm taking. So I'm using traditional film. There's a reason for that, because at depth I'm photographing particular wrecks, and it's a format that particularly works for deep shipwrecks. And this housing that we're looking at here is actually rated to 100 metres depth. It's quite substantial depth. Yeah. You're bearing in mind that most sport photographers will dive to a depth of say 50 metres at the most. This is rated to double that. I've had this particular housing down to 130 metres, and I'm happy to take it to around about 150 metres.
Yeah.
My advice to anybody that was starting photography right now, I would advise them to start with digital photography. I wouldn't advise you to start with film. But that's just the way it's going now. It's very difficult for me to get some of the films that I'm using, some of the format Agfa film that I was using on the Wilhelm Gustloff to photograph that. I cannot physically buy that film anymore, so we are drifting into that digital age.
Yeah.
And it's not until you start reading the archives as well that it brings home the real stories, you know. I mean, I read one particular story on the Gustloff and it sent a chill down me, you know. It's like a cabin boy had heard some gunshots and this is when the ship's sinking, and he's run down this corridor and burst into this room where he'd heard these gunshots, and there was like a Nazi U-boat commander there. Below him was his wife and daughter, and in his hand was a smoking pistol, and his son was crying, clinging to his leg, and the U-boat commander just said, "Please leave me to finish my business." And that guy was so desperate, he was just...
He actually shot them all
He actually shot his family rather than
let them freeze to death
now
in the
that's,
sea.
you know, I mean, we live in this day and age now, you know, nothing like that ever happens.
Yeah, you can't
But
really comprehend
that
it.
was
Yeah.
that was something that was happening all the time. It's real powerful history, and it's lying right there in the Baltic Sea. It's incredible, really. I mean, we should do a lot more there.
Tor, Per and Charlotte have dived General von Steuben several times.
The Germans, they set up this huge rescue operation to bring back all the German people who have moved to like Poland and Russia and all the countries where the Germans have been. The same Russian U-boat sank 4 of the German rescue ships, and Steuben is one of them. It was like strong wind, storm in the middle of the winter, and they had this big bang, water rushing in, people rushing out, and the ship was
They
like
didn't have
over
a chance. And most of these people were, except for the nurses and the doctors, were actually wounded in some way and you know, strapped to a bed or lying down and couldn't escape. And even the ones that did escape, they didn't have many minutes in that cold water before.
If I was talking about, you know, the top 5 or the top 10 wrecks, this is definitely the top 1 wreck, the best wreck we have ever been diving. One part of it is, of course, this experience of diving this huge, cool wreck, but the other part is like diving to this gravesite where like probably over 4,000 people lost their lives. That was kind of a spooky feeling, and the boat trip out, it's a 12-hour boat trip from the south part of Sweden. It's like in the middle of nowhere. We have no connections on the cell phones, no connection on the VHF. It's like in the middle of nowhere, and you just see on the echo sounder the shape of this huge wreck on the bottom. It's really creepy actually.
This footage was shot by Tor on board diving boat Moscus. Other divers on this diving trip are Richard Lundgren, Per Andersson and Robert Hanke.
Your father is actually from Germany. Just Germany, men är lite halvbögig uttalsgrupp också.
Vad sa du, Per?
Så att Robert bajsade
It's really difficult to get an idea of where we are and how and the distances. And soon we did discover that it was actually covered with nets.
also the anti-aircraft gun.
Yeah.
And this is, I guess, the shot of the bell.
This
you
is
can
the
see,
bell.
yeah. It's enormous. It must weigh like 100 kilo maybe. It's like a huge
Probably.
ship's bow.
But it doesn't have any inscriptions on it. And there you can see a fish actually caught in one of these nets that you find them everywhere on the wreck. And here you can see
inside the bridge.
Yeah.
The place where the steering wheel has been.
Yeah, and
was
also
from the beginning. Yeah.
telegraph.
The machine telegraph that signals down to the machine room, the engine room, what speed to go ahead or like stop or whatever. That's one thing actually missing on the wreck is the main steering wheel. Someone stole it.
If you look closely, you'll see two skulls and.
It's a strange feeling down here because you get like so amazed by this beautiful ship and all the things you see, and out of a sudden you start thinking about, my God, like 4,000 people dying, and you see some remains. It's a really spooky feeling, and it's also some feelings of like guilt, like disturbing this grave place. But it's a really important story to tell. So we actually found the hole from the torpedo.
Yeah.
You got like two direct hits from torpedoes, and people who have found the other hole or the other place where the one torpedo hit, they say that it's just like a dent.
Yeah.
So it probably never went off. But we found a place where the torpedo definitely went off because there was a huge hole. What do you say? Like maybe 20 meters in diameter, like twisted metal. It was way below the water line. The wreck on the bottom today is 100% intact. Everything is still there. You can see the mast, you can see like the wires, the lights, the ship's bell, everything is there. This is it, I think. Of course you see where there's more surface light, where shallower. So that's during decompression. We did pretty long dives on this wreck. We did like 35 minutes bottom time on 60 meters. So the total dive time was like something between 90 and 110 minutes or something like that. You can't talk too much about Stormen because that's the wreck actually.
It is. It's the best wreck.
We continue our journey along the northern German coastline, heading east. We cross the Elbe River. It has a busy commuter ferry line. In the next episode, we visit Laboy, a Type 7C U-boat and a war memorial. Kiel Channel shows us its most beautiful sights. We visit Pienemunde, In the former East Germany, a rocket museum, Russian submarine Juliet U-461, and hear the story of Werner von Braun.
What's interesting with Charlotte Schröder is that the ship's bell is still there,
Swedish divers dive more Baltic Sea wrecks. We take a car ferry from Rostock, a quick way to get to Estonia. The big green Estonian islands Saaremaa and Hiiumaa take us back in time. We talk about the recent Estonia ferry disaster. Our diving boat Pelagonia arrives in Hiiumaa, and we get ready to explore the local waters in the Baltic Sea. Our Baltic Sea adventure continues. Baltic Sea Adventure.